morning. It's Tuesday, February 17, 2015. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, Egypt strikes IS targets in Libya and calls for global intervention following the beheading of Egyptian Christians by the jihadist group. We tackle the vaccination debate amid the U.S. measles outbreak. And later on in the show, we look ahead to the Oscars. Good morning, I'm Meredith Ross. We begin with regional news. Egypt launched airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Libya yesterday, following the publication online of a video showing the beheadings of 21 Egyptian Christians in the country. Cairo said a tough intervention was needed and, together with France, called on the UN Security Council to take new measures against the jihadists and warned that failing to do so would threaten international security and peace. The strikes on ISIS bases and weapons depots came hours after Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi threatened a, quote, suitable response to the killings of the Coptic Christians. Egypt is already battling the Islamic State threat in its Sinai Peninsula, where scores of its troops have been killed in recent months. And in related news, France and Egypt signed a $5.9 billion deal yesterday for the sale to Cairo of 24 Rafale fighter jets that will undoubtedly be used in future strikes against IS. And we're joined in the studio by Channel 2 Foreign Affairs editor Arad Nir. Thank you for being here this morning, Arad. But before we have this discussion, let's watch the following report by the I-24 News Desk.
Cairo has opened a new front in the fight against the Islamic State. The Egyptian army bombed targets in Libya after the IS released gruesome footage of beheadings of 21 Egyptian Christians there, which provoked outrage in Egypt.
Egypt reserves the right of retaliation, and with the methods and timing it sees fit for retribution from those murderers and criminals who are without the slightest humanity.
Libya's parliament strongly condemned the Egyptian attack, which killed about 50 jihadists, and called it an assault on the country's sovereignty. The attack focused on Islamic State camps, training sites and weapons storage areas in the militant-held city of Derna in Libya, where the militants have thrived amid chaos. Egypt is following in the footsteps of Jordan, which has hammered IS militants with airstrikes in Iraq and Syria after the brutal abduction and murder of a Jordanian pilot. However, Cairo, a strategic U.S. ally, is no stranger to battling radical militants and in the past years has been fighting insurgents in the Sinai Peninsula who have pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. The attack in Libya marks the first time Egypt announced military action against Islamist targets in its western neighbor, having previously denied it targeted militants there. As Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi visited the country's top cathedral to pay his condolences to the Christian community, Cairo residents expressed their shock by the apparent beheadings and support for their country's response.
I swear this is a criminal terrorist act done by people who have absolutely nothing to do with religion. And really, personally, I didn't sleep last night after what happened. All Egyptians couldn't sleep, and I'm very happy with Sisi's reaction because he avenged the Egyptian people from the criminal terrorist act.
Tuesday marks 4 years since the official day of revolt in Libya, which has been in chaos since 2011 and the overthrow of its then leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Al-Sisi is prepared to escalate his battle against the Islamic State militants in the region, who now pose an imminent threat to Egypt.
And we're also joined on the phone from Cairo by I-24 News contributor Jacob Wertschaffer. Good morning.
Good morning, Meredith.
Now, what's the mood in Egypt in the wake of these gruesome beheadings? Did the attacks in Libya do anything to appease the public's cries for revenge?
Well, I think what we should say is the following, that this country is now in full military mobilization. The National Defense Council has moved troops into all of Egypt's cities, nationwide over the past 24 hours. And the country has basically been put on a war footing. So it's a national mobilization. The other thing I would point out is that Sisi is making it very clear. Any violence directed at Egypt's cops is going to be subject to prompt and severe measures from the security state he heads here in Cairo. The government here is very concerned that the attacks on the cops, and particularly the sectarian anti-Christian message of the IS assassins, is an attempt by the Islamists to promote sectarian conflict in Egypt.
We seem to lose you a bit there. We're just going to come back to studio, but do stay on the line. Rod, how much influence does IS have in Libya? at this time?
Well, they have some kind of control over the region of Darna, which is in the eastern part of the country. We must recall that Libya is totally torn apart since the downfall of Muammar Gaddafi. The West helped the downfall and assisted the resistance against them, but apparently nothing worked out after this fall. And as I said earlier, Libya is falling apart, is being torn apart. The most interesting thing, Meredith, I think, about this horrific documentation supplied by ISIS in the beginning of this week is the fact that we see how much coordinated is the Libyan branch of ISIS and the Syrian Iraqi branch of ISIS, meaning they can coordinate, they can stage their messages accordingly. And this is the most prominent, I think, fact that we can learn from this event, which was not discussed as much in international media in recent days.
And going back to Egypt now, Jacob, you said that Egypt is pretty much in full military mode at this point. Do you think they will join the Western coalition against ISIS like Jordan?
Well, again, from here, the perspective is different. The view here is that Egypt has been in a struggle against Islamic militancy by itself for some time. So it's not as though Egypt is jumping on a bandwagon started by Jordanian action in retaliation for the assassination of its pilot. But, I understand the question. The foreign minister is on his way to the United States. In fact, he's already in New York, and he'll be in Washington later. And the government here is going to move to have a very frank conversation with the Obama administration about Islamic militancy and Egypt's role in the international coalition against it.
And then before we continue, let's hear what Egyptian leaders had to say regarding this affair.
Of course, what happened is a barbaric act and savage terrorist act that goes back to the Stone Age, and I can't imagine who would do that. Egypt has every right to defend itself, and it must take steps against this type of terrorism carried out by those fundamentalists.
Egypt reserves the right of retaliation, and with the methods and timing it sees fit for retribution from those murderers and criminals who are without the slightest humanity. I have called on the government to continue the strict execution of prohibiting Egyptians from traveling to Libya through these deteriorating times to preserve their lives. I have also called on the relevant authorities to take sufficient procedures to secure and ease the return of Egyptians who want to return to the homeland.
And bringing it to a more international perspective, so we see that this ISIS front is emerging in Libya. Do you see anything coming from this Washington anti-terror summit that's about to take place?
Well, summits don't bring end to terror. I've been covering in my journalistic career many anti-terrorist summits, and the terror is on the rise. Coming back to Egypt, with your permission, Meredith, we must remember that Sisi has to confront now ISIS on his western border and also on his eastern border in Sinai. Actually, within the territory of Egypt, there's some extreme Islamist groups aligned with ISIS who are operating for a long time. Right. So he is in a really difficult situation, and we must watch him very carefully to see how he tackles it, because the Egyptian population has sympathy to the ideas of ISIS. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which he crushed, is actually more aligned, more affiliated with the ISIS ideas. So the situation is very, very grim. And coming back to these airstrikes that we mentioned, Egypt has been striking ISIS targets beforehand, but no one was talking about it. ISIS targets in Libya, I mean. No one was talking about it. This is the first time that Sisi comes out on TV, as we see, and vows to crush this kind of activity. But it has also a downfall to it. You see, the border between Libya and Egypt is very, very porous. It's 100 kilometers of desert with no posts, with no military, with no checkpoints along it. This would give the ISIS people, ISIS fighters, access into Egypt now.
Do you think Egypt will be trying now to beef up security on the border? Or they
will try, but it's, as you said, it's nearly impossible because it's really hundreds of kilometers of deserted land, not figuratively speaking, but literally desert over there. And now when Sisi openly strikes ISIS targets in Libya, then they have sort of a pretext or justification to go and retaliate within Egypt. And this is a very, very dangerous situation, which we must watch and see how it develops.
And, you know, I want to ask Jacob something about something that you mentioned about how the people of Egypt perhaps sympathize with the ideology, especially of the Muslim Brotherhood, and obviously Islamic State is a very extreme version of this ideology. But Jacob, are the people 100% behind President Sisi at this point?
Look, on the security issue, there was a poll by a respected Egyptian public survey company before the Libya beheadings, and it said that only 30% of the public believed that the government here had yet to take effective measures against terrorism. So I think the mobilization of public opinion has actually been very successful by the regime here. Most Egyptians support the notion that the battle needs to be taken to IS. I think the idea that the Brotherhood still commands a majority of the loyalty of the Egyptian population, I just think that's a little dated. They failed in government, and now I think this attempt to have a sectarian message against the Christians of Egypt, who after all were here before the Muslims of Egypt, is going against a very deep strain of Egyptian nationalism that holds that the Copts are a key part of the Egyptian nation.
So you think that Sisi is being smart and utilizing and bringing the country together at this point following these beheadings? And also to mention the release of the Al Jazeera journalists, is public opinion going up now after these few weeks?
I don't think Egyptian public opinion ever cared about Western journalists. I think that's a Western concern. And I think the Western piece of this is public opinion here is going to look to see how successful Sisi is in engaging Washington. I think, you know, people look very fondly on the president for his ability to bring a major leader like President Putin here, to get a new bunch of military airplanes brought in from France over the past few days. So Egypt's ability to command international resources and attention in its struggle against terrorism is looked upon with favor here.
And you mentioned Washington. What is the significance of the Egyptian foreign minister arriving in the U.S. in the past few days?
There are already scheduled meetings in New York with counterparts of the United Nations. But everyone knows there's been tension in the Washington-Cairo relationship, and it's been over things like the Peter Gress detention and against the process of what democracy and transition to it would look like in Egypt. And I think, you know, you've seen other leaders and allies of the United States in the region taking kind of a aggressive stance towards its patron in Washington. And Sisi's gonna follow kind of in that. And with those tones and overtones, and he's coming with demands, and he's coming with a message, and I think he's going to be asked to listen to as much as be asking to be, you know, hearing what Washington's expectations are.
And so, Rod, now we're seeing that he met with Putin, and now we're seeing the arrival of Egypt's foreign minister to Washington. Where is Egypt pivoting at this point?
They're checking options. You know, Sisi is trying to keep his cards close to the chest. He's trying to align with all forces around. He doesn't take any chances. And if you ask me, he plays it right.
Yeah. And going back now to Libya, because we were just mentioning it earlier, who exactly is in control, and does ISIS have a good chance of taking over?
Well, in Libya there are currently two governments, one which is being accepted by the West and the other one which is not being accepted by the international community, let's put it this way. They are both fighting between themselves, and there are lots of militia pockets along this huge, vast country which are being controlled by local militias. As we said, in the Darna region, on the west part of the country, this is an ISIS stronghold which is, as we realized, very well coordinated with the headquarters of ISIS in Syria and Iraq.
Well, it sounds like quite a grim situation at this point. Arad,
yep.
Thank you for these comments, and you will stay put for the next segment.
I will.
And in other news, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu challenged the White House yesterday over its plans to strike a nuclear deal with Iran. Speaking before the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, Netanyahu asked why, if the deal was good, were its details being hidden. The U.S. State Department on Monday denied an Israeli media report that claimed that Washington stopped updating Israel about the status of the P5+1 nuclear talks with Iran amid tensions between the Obama administration and Jerusalem. Now, according to the report, U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice was told by the Obama administration to cease communicating with her Israeli counterpart Yossi Cohen regarding the talks. Chief U.S. negotiator Wendy Sherman also reportedly said she would no longer keep Israel updated on the issue. Now, relations between the allies' leaders have been strained in recent weeks, chiefly over a planned speech by Netanyahu before both houses of Congress just days before Israeli elections. Netanyahu has repeatedly refused to cancel the speech, in which he is set to warn against signing a nuclear deal with Iran. And House Speaker John Boehner on Sunday said he invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to address the Congress without letting the White House know in advance, as he feared President Barack Obama's administration might nix his plans. Let's hear what Netanyahu had to say.
Just as Iran knows what deal it has been offered, naturally, Israel also knows what the details are of the deal that is being formulated. We are the ones with the greatest danger if Iran arms itself with nuclear weapons. Our consistent position is that the proposed deal is dangerous for Israel's security. But if somebody thinks that this is a good deal, why is it being hidden?
It's my sacred duty as Prime Minister of Israel to make Israel's case. On March 3rd, I'll fulfill that duty, representing all the citizens of Israel before the two houses of Congress. And I will make the best case for Israel that I can, knowing that our case is just, that our case is sound, and that our case offers the best hope to resolve this issue peacefully. Thank you.
So still with us in studio to discuss this further is Channel 2 Foreign Affairs editor Arad Nir. Thanks for being here again. And we are also joined via Skype from Washington, D.C. by Times of Israel correspondent Rebecca Shimoni-Stoyle. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
So what's the latest stateside? We're hearing a lot of different messages coming through.
Well, right now we do have mixed messages regarding whether or not communications are off. Regarding the Iran talks. What we do know is we're getting more details, and actually there was an article in the Washington Post today as well, that are kind of filling in the timeline a little bit, that are offering us maybe a little bit more depth in understanding what exactly has gone so very wrong in U.S.-Israel relations over the past 2 months.
Yeah, and of course this report that you mentioned in the Washington Post says that U.S. officials are accusing Netanyahu of leaking details of the Iranian negotiations. So what basis does this have?
Well, as you might know, and certainly as my colleagues on Channel 2 know, there were two reports over the weekend. There were two reports, I think, actually a while ago, that documented exact numbers or approximate numbers of centrifuges that were going to be allowed as part of the talks with Iran. Now, the U.S. has said that the only way that Israel could have had those numbers is if Netanyahu himself or his office leaked those numbers to members of the Israeli media.
And stay with us, Rebecca, but we're coming back to studio to Arad. So is there a real risk here to the bilateral ties despite the State Department's denials?
Well, there is a risk to the personal ties between the administration in Washington and the current Israeli Prime Minister and his entourage. There's no doubt about it. I don't see any risk to the bilateral relations between the two nations. The United States of America is committed to the safety of Israel, not only because of local political considerations, because of this is the American ideology. You know, this is the essence of being America, the United States of America. And this is why I don't see any long-term damage regarding this current constraint. Nevertheless, the personal hostility between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama
it seems like could it get any worse?
Unprecedented, and it can get worse.
It can get worse.
And it can get worse. You know, if Netanyahu will form the next government, we'll see after the next, after election, we will see how it will get worse.
And I'm just curious, how much of an effect could Netanyahu's speech have on an American policy with Iran?
I don't think that Netanyahu is looking for effect on American policy. Netanyahu is playing local politics now. And Netanyahu is trying to change the issues discussed before elections and bring Iran back to the table. This was his main portfolio in previous election and the one before that. And funny enough, Netanyahu has done nothing to change the situation in Iran, apart from yelling that the agreement is going to be a bad agreement. You know, if Netanyahu had proper relationship with the White House, he could have actually called President Obama and discussed it with him. This is impossible. And in order to change the discourse here in this country, he decided to go to Washington. Now, see what we're having. All Israeli intelligence agencies say that there will probably be no agreement by the deadline of the 24th of March. So Netanyahu is in a win-win situation. If he goes there and there is no agreement, which probably the situation is, then he can claim that it's due to his speech in Congress that there is no agreement. And so, I mean, what can he lose apart from the already lost relationship with Obama?
So stay put. Also, Rebecca, stay put. We are returning now to our diplomatic reporter, Tal Shalev, who is standing by at the annual conference of the Institute for National Security Studies, which this year focuses mostly on Israel-U.S. relations. Very interesting timing here. So good morning, Tal. What are the headlines that are coming out of this year's conference?
Well, good morning, Meredith. It's definitely the talk of the town here this morning, all the Israel-U.S. debacle regarding the Netanyahu planned Congress speech. And this is going to be the main topic that will be discussed today. Yesterday was dedicated to the politicians. We had representatives of all parties laying out their foreign policies. An extremely harsh speech by the centrist candidate, the leader of the Yesh Atid party, Yair Lapid, who lashes out at Netanyahu, saying that because of his decision to go to speak to Congress, that is actually the decision that actually dismantled the whole Israeli effort to try and influence the Iran negotiations, because of the backlash, because of the fact that it had a very negative effect on the Kirk-Menendez bill that was debated in Congress. So definitely this is the talk of the town here today. Soon we are going to hear the Israeli Foreign Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, who is opening the second day of the conference, who will be, of course, probably addressing this, even though Lieberman has been quite subtle with his criticism on Netanyahu on this issue. It's Netanyahu seems to be gaining votes actually inside his own political base with every confrontation with the Obama administration. So whoever is voting or rooting to get some of that right-wing electoral base, just as Lieberman is, it's not the wisest decision to attack Netanyahu on this issue.
Well, Tal Shalev, thank you very much for these updates live from Tel Aviv. And Rebecca, we're turning to you now. Exactly how much progress is being made in these negotiations? Because according to reports, the U.S. is making a lot of compromises in order to achieve a deal with Iran.
Well, of course, like much else with this negotiations, the question is, who do you ask? The administration has been cagey about its own perception about the ability to come to any sort of a conclusion. I think the current bets that the administration has said publicly are 50-50, which is not terribly optimistic for a project that they've been now working on overtly for over a year. So the March 24th deadline is, of course, a deadline, and they're very specific, not for a comprehensive framework, but for a political framework. And perhaps more important is to keep in mind that so far the talks with Iran have not met a single one of the deadlines set up heretofore. And so the chances that they're going to meet this deadline, of course, people are looking at somewhat skeptically here in Washington.
Yes, exactly. I mean, as you mentioned, they keep missing these deadlines. So when will they ever reach a deadline? I mean, is this ever really going to take shape? I think is also a big question right now.
You know, I asked an administration official back in November a question similar, which was, what we understood of the 8-page document that is called the Joint Plan of Action was that it offered a 6-month framework for talks with an option of a 6-month extension. And so I asked back then in November, a couple weeks before the extension was off, so what happens now? And the answer that I got from the administration is basically, we made the rules, we can also change the rules. And that does seem to be the attitude within the P5+1, that, you know, the framework of the JPOA is mutually agreed upon, and so they can also mutually agree upon to change the timeline set up in the JPOA.
And turning back to the studio now, on Friday, the Wall Street Journal reported that Supreme Leader of Iran, Khamenei, sent a secret letter to Obama. We understand these two are communicating kind of behind the scenes, which isn't surprising always in negotiations. But what was said? What exactly is happening?
Well, apparently, according to this report, there was no particulars in this recent correspondence. The Supreme Leader actually mentioned some wrongdoings of the American administrations, a long history regarding Iran. He didn't actually comment or react to the current demands regarding the P+5 negotiations. But coming back to the issue of extending the negotiations, with your permission, Meredith, I think it's not bad. You know, as long as there is ongoing discussion, it's good for Israel, it's good for the West, and maybe it's also good for Iran, because as far as we know, at least up until this point of time, the IAEA have been stated that Iran complies with its obligations regarding its nuclear program, at least up until this point of time. So if they carry on applying this, then it's a win situation, win-win situation.
Long negotiations ahead. Rodney, thank you very much for being here this morning. And Rebecca, thank you for joining us from Washington. Coming up next, we sit down with a visiting German minister to discuss 50 years of ties with Israel. But first, let's hear more of this morning's headlines. Welcome back to the morning edition. We are happy to be joined in the studio this morning by Mr. Andreas Stoch, Minister of Education, Youth and Sports of Germany's Baden-Württemberg state. Mr. Stoch, together with his colleague, Economy and Finance Minister Niels Schmidt, are in Israel leading a delegation of dozens of business people, politicians and journalists as part of the events marking 50 years of ties between Israel and Germany. Israel's foreign ministry that helped set up the visit set as its goal to strengthen the connection of the younger German generation to the Jewish state and its society. The visit comes at a time when Germany, like all of Europe, is dealing with the rising threat of terror attacks, a threat Israel is all too familiar with, and the repercussions on the local community. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
So tell us about your trip so far and what you have planned for your time left here.
You know, we came to Israel with a big delegation of people from the economy to get these links between the German, the Baden-Württemberg economy and also Israel companies. And for me, as the Minister for Education, it is very important also to cooperate with the authorities here in Israel in question of educating young people. Because I think the German-Israel relation is so important also in the responsibility for the young people, what they think about each other. And I think the intercultural and also the interreligious competence is such a very important thing of educating. So it's very important for us to be here and to think about ideas of working together.
Certainly, and I want to get your impression of what the visit has been like so far. What's your impression of the region?
You know, it's a very interesting region. It's my first stay in Israel, so it was a new experience. But I think it's a very lively. It's a really energetic area where you feel that many young people think of what will the future bring, and they are thinking positive, I think, and therefore I have a good feeling in what the relations could be between our countries, but it's also a feeling of being, you know, under attention. What could happen here in this region, which is not the safest place in the world? What is our place in the future? Is it here? Is it somewhere abroad? How could we connect? How could we also help that this place, Israel, and the whole region could be a place where the future of the world could, let's say, being created?
And you mentioned, obviously, strengthening ties and educating youth about how they perceive each other's country. But what other ways do you think Israel and Germany can mutually benefit one another, especially in high tech, for instance?
That's right. We have a very good development of high-tech ideas here in Israel as a startup nation, which is worldwide known. And also Germany, or the southwest of Germany, Baden-Württemberg, is a very strong economic place. So we could think about how could we work together, getting the ideas of Israel together with the strength of Baden-Württemberg as a producing state, and that's what we are thinking. How could we stick this together to put these two competences together to make it a strong relationship?
And moving to a more serious note, we mentioned it in your introduction, the terror threat that is facing Germany, that's facing Europe, as we saw this past weekend in Denmark. Obviously, some deadly shootings occurred. So what is the general sense in Germany with regard to the terror threat, as Israel is so familiar with?
There are, you know, things which could make you frightened. Also in Germany, you have a feeling of many people who say, how does it work with all these religions together? Especially the question of the Muslim religion is actually a point where many people have a fear, are frightened, but some of them don't even know a person who is of Muslim religion. So it's very often it's a question of not knowing each other. And so we try to put it in the education as one fundamental point to get young people an impression that that should be normal to interact with people, not depending on where they are from, which religion do they have, which color does their skin have, just accepting them as a human being. And this is for us in Germany, I think education, as well as in Israel, education is the main key to have an open society.
Absolutely. Education is where it all begins. And the issues you're describing, you know, the feeling of the other and being afraid, that it's not just a German issue. It's an issue occurring across Europe. But unfortunately, one of the repercussions are movements of extremist right movements against immigrants, for instance, and just not really understanding where the other side is coming from. So can you talk about the Pegida movement that we've seen rise in Germany, and what is the ministry working to help educate against movements like this?
You know, the Pegida movement is a movement of people going on the street. They are not satisfied with their situation. And it's too easy, I think, to put it just for one reason that say the Muslims are guilty, they are the ones why my situation is not so good. So I think we must talk to these people. We must tell them it's not a question if there is someone who is Muslim or Jew or Christ. It's just a question, how could all the people, especially the young people, get a perspective? How could they have a good view of their own future? And if they have a good view, they have the expectations that the situation will be better for them, then it's much more difficult for extremists to get them for their ideas. And so I think the Pegida movement is now, at the moment, after a few weeks starting to trickle down. So I think it's not a real danger, but we must be very aware of it, and especially of the problems why the people go on the streets.
And another issue gripping Europe is obviously anti-Semitism as well. These attacks recently in Paris and in Denmark obviously targeted Jewish populations. What's the situation for Jews in Germany, and what's being done to prevent this anti-Semitism?
You know, there is a special relation between Israel and Germany, and there is a special thinking about the question of anti-Semitism in Germany. It is scaring that some people seem to go back in old, behaviors to say the Jews are guilty of this or that. I think in the main society, anti-Semitism has no place, and I think for the people from Israel or Jewish people, it is still a very safe place where they are well accepted as a very important part of the German society. So I think the majority, the wide majority of the Germans isn't at any place anti-Semitic. So I think it's again a question of a good education, as we, for example, started the cooperation between Baden-Württemberg and Yad Vashem, because we would want to place it in schools to make this special relationship aware for the young people, to keep it in mind, and that anti-Semitic thinkings will not rise again in Germany.
Well, it sounds like you are certainly doing very important work to educate many people, but especially youth in all areas, to create an equal sense of identity. Well, thank you very much for being with us this morning, Mr. Stoch.
Thank you so much.
And joining us for the daily press review for the headlines you may have missed is Tony Grant.
Good morning to you. Wow, dramatic skies behind you. Don't look.
Yes,
But let's start with some Israeli news, actually, which actually is very interesting.
I think we just heard some.
We heard some.
What was that? I think that was Livni.
Heard some. Oh, okay. Well, we can. Speaking of Israeli government, we had some sad news to report from late yesterday. The Minister of Religious Services, who was with the Jewish Home Party, Habayit HaYehudit, his name is Uri Orbach, died, unfortunately. Passed away at the age of 54 after suffering from a blood disease for months. And this was...
he was just recently hospitalized.
Since January. And Haaretz, I think we have actually a clip here of Orbach. A very much loved guy who actually kind of paved the way in a way for Naftali Bennett, who is a bit of a controversial figure, but of course in the Jewish Home Party and the Minister of the Economy. They were very close, obviously. And again, this was in Haaretz that it was reported, along with all the Israeli newspapers, about this major loss
on
the
watch
Israeli
was
political spectrum.
On his health in the media lately, so unfortunate news.
Also, apparently a very well-regarded journalist, as well as being active in government affairs for so long. So we also have, on a different note altogether, the Jerusalem Post reported that there was a new incoming chief of the Israel Defense Forces yesterday. Benny Gantz ended his 4-year term officially on Monday, and now Major General Gadi Eisenkot, who was basically sworn in. This happened yesterday, and he was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant General.
So there we have new Chief of
Netanyahu.
Staff.
There we go, yes. And as the papers are pointing out, perhaps more poignantly than the television, he's got a lot of challenges on his plate, from the tensions in the north to the tensions in the south and the entire region. So he once has one of the most interesting and probably stressful jobs in the universe, I think.
He really is coming in at an inopportune time, but hopefully there won't be any situations to worry about in the future.
Well, I think you could say it always is an inopportune time in the Middle East, but he's also a very seasoned and well-qualified man for the job. So there seems to be a broad consensus that he's the right guy for the job at this time. So
interesting.
We're happy to see that. And another Israeli headline of note: Moshe Ya'alon, Israel's defense minister, yesterday or Monday, he lambasted the Palestinian Authority for what he says is bailing out on the plan to ease the Gaza blockade. Interesting, because he's saying that that he's accusing the PA of failing to implement that deal that would have had PA presidential guards at border crossings in and out of Gaza following the 50-day war. And he's saying that basically there is a mechanism in place with the Israeli coordinator of government activities in the territories and the U.S. Representative Robert Seri, and what's missing is the Palestinian Prime Minister aspect of this. this sort of tripartite equation to have sort of helped.
That's surprising, isn't it?
Well, he basically is accusing the PA bigwigs of cutting and running so that they can actually point the finger at the other players, so to speak. And in the meantime, the situation in Gaza, certainly isn't getting any better.
This is his accusation.
So finger pointing, but again, not too surprising.
Lots of finger pointing in this region.
Yes, and some collaboration. Interesting. You talked about before Egypt, and of course these airstrikes in Libya. Al Aram, which is basically a very pro-government newspaper in Cairo. Interesting headline saying Egyptian airstrikes kill 64 Islamic State militants in Libya, according to Libyan army spokesperson. So you have a major Egyptian paper here, which is basically letting the Libyans say, hey, yeah, this happened and we are cooperating. So it's kind of deflecting any potential finger pointing at Egypt, saying, well, it's Libya that basically is off, and they're of course, working together on this new threat, I guess we can say. But interesting how they position it.
It's an interesting angle there.
Very much so. And you see it also in the Gulf News, which is a paper from the Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. They say that they're condemning the quote-unquote ugly crime of Daesh, which is of course, the Arabic word for Islamic State group in Libya, and the UAE is, according to the article, devoting all of their resources to support Egypt's effort to eradicate terrorism. Does that mean they're supporting the ongoing efforts in Libya? Probably, because they seem to have done so in the past. So very tight cooperation with some Middle East Arab country partners with this situation.
Yeah, and as we were mentioning earlier, Libya is just in complete ruins right now. It's not really clear who exactly is in control. Yeah. The Islamic State, unfortunately, is gaining more ground there. Very, very scary stuff.
And I don't have the headline, but the New York Times ran a story too, kind of talking about Egypt wading into the chaos of Libya and kind of sounding a cautionary note. So again, it's something that is reflected in different ways depending on what newspaper you're reading.
Right.
But definitely a complicated situation.
Yes, complicated to say the least.
Yes, as is Argentina. And the allegations.
What's going on there lately? I mean, big headlines this past week.
Okay, the latest one, or one of the latest one, is that facing cover-up allegations, Argentina's President Cristina Fernandez says she's tough. And she's been toughened by the winters of Patagonia, the region in which she was raised. Now, she needs to be tough because there's these allegations.
Sounds like a defensive statement right there.
Well, it's actually no laughing matter because she's apparently trying to cover up alleged Iranian involvement in the 1994 bombing of the Jewish Center in Buenos Aires following the potential suicide, but more likely murder of Alberto Nisman, the state prosecutor.
Fishy circumstances.
Very fishy circumstances. A new state investigator is proceeding with the case. So even though she's somewhat of a lame duck president, she has got a lot of stress on her plate and will have a lot of questions to answer as this trial, or case I should say, proceeds, regardless of the fact that she is actually a sitting president.
Right.
So interesting and intriguing to say the least. If we have time for one more.
I think we have time for one more.
France, keeping things interesting. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls is apparently, according to a former French minister, Roland Dumas, under Jewish influence.
Okay, what does that mean? Is that like a diagnosis you get at the doctor?
Yes, it's let's just say it's not the most politically correct thing to say. Not that you always have to be politically correct, but the Prime Minister, the current French Prime Minister's wife is Jewish, apparently, and that has sparked this sort of untoward commentary from this former French minister who served as the president of the Constitutional Court at one time, and he said that Valls has personal alliances. Everyone knows that he's married to someone who has a good influence on him. It's a lot of sort of innuendo.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're kind of going around the word.
Yeah, when I say France, if it needs that kind of back and forth at this particular moment, but it's being reported in the media.
Okay, well, Tony, thank you very much for this press review. And coming up next, we will tackle the vaccination debate, which is making major headlines amid an outbreak of measles in North America. But first, let's hear some more of this morning's headlines. Welcome Welcome back. It's still Tuesday, February 17, 2015. This is still the morning edition, and I am still Meredith Ross. Thank you for staying with us. Now, a recent outbreak of measles in the North American continent has infected more than 150 people. U.S. authorities believe the outbreak began when an infected person from out of the country visited Disneyland in late December. The measles outbreak has renewed a debate over the anti-vaccination movement, in which fears about potential side effects of vaccines have prompted some parents to refuse inoculations for their children, despite the medical establishment's strong support of them. Measles was declared eliminated in the U.S. in 2000 after decades of intensive childhood vaccine efforts. But in 2014, the country had its highest number of cases in 2 decades, which many blame on the scientifically questionable practices of the anti-vax movement. Now, to discuss this hot-button issue, we are joined in studio by Chairman of the Israeli Vaccines Information Center, Mor Sagamon. Good morning. Thank you for being with us today. Good morning. And we will have an interesting discussion here, but let's take a look at the following report that examines the recent developments, and we'll take it from there.
If it's a healthy immune system, it doesn't get sick.
Dr. Patricia Klur meets with parents worried about the impact immunizations may have on their children's health. Klur says many are fearful about the contents of vaccines, which she says often include aluminum and dangerous chemicals.
And they wonder why we're having problems with learning disabilities and problems with reading and studying and anger issues. I think that their brains are being affected by all of these adverse chemicals.
Klur says she helps parents find alternatives to vaccines, including eating organic foods, living a healthier lifestyle, and getting chiropractic treatments.
God made these perfect bodies. They can heal themselves if you just allow them to do that.
Hey, let's take a listen.
Pediatrician Dr. Joseph Marsani says parents often cite a study linking vaccines to autism. But like the vast majority of doctors in the U.S., he insists this research has since been debunked and that vaccines have become safer.
I've seen some tragic illnesses that are preventable. And so I think it's real important to be careful about saying that no vaccines are the way to go. He looks like he's hungry right now.
Immunizations given to children 2 and under have led to dramatic declines in vaccine-preventable diseases in the United States. But the UN says America lags behind most other developed nations. Vaccine refusal rates for kindergartners top 6% in some states. The U.S. government blames recent outbreaks of illnesses like whooping cough, chickenpox and measles on an increase in vaccine refusal over the last several years.
You can have a play group where 4 of the 5 children in that play group perhaps aren't vaccinated, and that's certainly a situation where there is a much greater risk for transmission.
So it was already disappearing all by itself.
Skeptics like Dr. Patricia Klur and her patients say they'll take their chances and will continue to exercise their right to refuse vaccines for themselves and their children.
Okay, so we heard pretty much all the arguments for and against. Now, this is the main question, to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. Where do you stand on this, Mor?
Well, I have my personal conclusions based on my own scientific research, but I'm the chair of the Israeli Vaccine Information Center, which is a voluntary nonprofit, and we bring the research and the data and the official data to the public. And when we look at the measles data, it's outstanding. Measles was described in the 60s, before vaccinations, as a benign disease with very mild complications, with very rare chances of dying out of measles. I mean, the chances of dying from measles before vaccinations was 0.0002%. I mean, you had 225 times more chances of dying from an accident, 78-fold dying from diabetes. And I don't see we're banning sugar and soda pops in schools. You had 43-fold more times dying of committing suicide than dying from measles. So this was the disease that we had, very benign. Plus, the World Health Organization, it says that vitamin A can reduce the death rates of measles by 50%. Now, when was the last time that you heard that from your doctor or from any official? So all of a sudden you have the vaccines, and the infection disease is demonized, and if you're not getting your shots, you're going to die. And this is just fear-mongering, and it's not based on any solid data.
You know, I also wonder with measles, though, even though you're saying it's not necessarily deadly, perhaps at all, it's very scary looking. It's a very scary and an uncomfortable disease to have.
Yeah, it's a disease. We have many infectious diseases. It's not nice to have a disease. And it may even be complicated for very few. And those few who died from measles, they weren't the typical child. They weren't your child or my child. There were people with background conditions, with deficient immune system, and they probably wouldn't have sustained the vaccine anyway. Now, when we look at the data, and I brought a chart, I don't know if you can show it, the death rates from measles were declining 98% before the vaccine were introduced. So something else caused the measles death rates to diminish anyway. So this is what we typically had before the vaccinations. Now, what's also interesting is once we introduce the vaccine, and the vaccine is only against one strain of measles, and you have 23 strains of the measles virus. For instance, this Disneyland outbreak that caused all this debate, all the cases that were lab confirmed were confirmed from a virus strain that is not the one which is in the vaccine anyway.
So anyway, people would have been
susceptible
to it, even if they had the vaccine when they were little.
And you see that outbreaks of measles, you have even with communities with 99 and 100% vaccination rates. And you know why? Dr. Poland, the #1 probably expert in the world about measles, tells us that. It tells us that about up to 10% of vaccinated people are not going to develop antibodies anyway. And 9% of kids are going to lose their supposedly protective antibodies after 7 years. So the imaginary 95% herd immunity supposedly is science fiction. You're not going to get it, even if everyone's going to get their two recommended shots on the planet. And that's why you keep seeing these outbreaks over and over. And measles have been with us for years. There hasn't been a year without measles outbreaks.
It's just not necessarily mentioned in the press. But before we finish, I do want to say that we did invite doctors from Israel's health ministry to come on the show, but we're met by refusal to share the studio with anyone who speaks out against vaccination. So here's the official response from the health ministry. I'm just going to read it. It's a bit long. Measles is one of the most contagious known diseases. The vaccine for measles, along with the mumps, is ordinarily given to children as part of a package of childhood inoculations. The vaccine offers good protection against contracting the disease to the child and their surroundings. Now, in the U.S., before the implementation of an inoculation regime, between 3 to 4 million people contracted the disease. 48,000 people were hospitalized and 500 people died of it every year. And because of vaccination, only 500 people there have contracted the disease since 2000. So what is your response to this? I'm just going to cut that short because we are running out of time.
My response to that is that when you look at the data, at the official data, not on the statements, and even on the Israeli official data from the Ministry of Health, you see the same pattern again. The measles death rate, I mean, you had, before vaccination, you had 8,000 measles cases reported in Israel. The whole country, only 8,000 cases of measles without any vaccinations. You had maybe 20 death cases in the whole country with no vaccinations anyway. And we've seen that there are other factors that had contributed to the decline of the death rates anyway. So it's all, I mean, with such a mild disease and extreme rare and a rare chances of dying, you need a damn convincing arguments to vaccinate everybody. You need to convince me that the vaccine is very safe and very effective. And we haven't yet mentioned anything about the safety of the vaccine. The MMR vaccine, which is the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine that we're mentioning, there was a wide review 2 years ago, review of all the literature about that. And they came to the conclusion that the safety studies of the MMR vaccine, both pre and post licensure, were inadequate. And this is what we know about after 30 years of vaccinating with this vaccine. We don't know about anything about the safety as far as the literature is concerned. But we do know that we have about 150 reported death cases from the vaccine itself to the vaccine adverse events reporting system in the United States, probably more because there are a lot of events without any date. We know that there are people who are compensated for injuries from the vaccine. We know that the Institute of Medicine in their adverse events document 2 years ago They mentioned that it can cause the vaccine can cause brain inflammation, and when you look at the package insert, which is what the manufacturer tells us about the vaccine, the list goes on and on about deafness and measles and.
Well, Mor, thank you very much for being here. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but it's been interesting hearing certainly this side of the argument. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Meredith.
From measles to history, we welcome to the studio I-24 News correspondent Danny Swibel to take us on a tour down memory lane for a segment we call This Week in History. Good morning. What do you have for us?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
No measles, I hope.
No measles, none of that stuff. That's in the past. I'm going to take you back to good old 1985, Back to the Future style. Breakfast Club debuted 30 years ago yesterday. So we are really definitely getting old. Were you even alive when that movie came out? I don't think you were.
I'm not commenting on that.
I definitely was alive. I remember this. It's a bit scary.
Okay, do we have the trailer?
We do have the trailer. We should check it out first and get into the spirit of things.
06. You have exactly 8 hours and 54 minutes to ponder the error of your ways. Any questions?
Yeah. Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
A brain, a beauty, a jock, a rebel, and a recluse.
Can't believe this is really happening to me.
Before this day is over, they'll break the rules.
Chicks cannot hold their smoke. That's what it is.
Bare their souls.
I'm a nymphomaniac.
Your parents aware of this?
I mean, you just can't touch John Hughes. He's just unreal, his genius.
A classic director who was responsible also for Ferris Bueller's Days Off. And this is very apropos that I'm in studio with you because we have the Chicago connection. John Hughes, all his movies were set in Chicago, as well as National Lampoon's Vacation, all based.
I think some of the best movies of all time. So I don't know if we're the Chicago connection, we're a little biased, but totally agreed. Very, mind-blowing. Breakfast Club is 30 years old.
30 years old. Wow. We're getting up there in age.
Okay.
Well, maybe we should move on because it's,
move on.
It's too much. So now it is 83 years in Yoko Ono's life. It's her birthday tomorrow. So the multimedia artist, singer, peace activist, you know, she does a little bit of everything. She's getting up there, but she's definitely still producing music. She collaborates with many different artists. And kind of ironically is that she's very involved in the Strawberry Fields in New York, the memorial for Lennon. And the release of Strawberry Fields actually came out in 1967 today. Wow. So some really kind of special things in Beatles history.
Connection there. Well, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Yoko, wherever you are.
Yes.
So let's move on from there. We don't have to talk about Yoko too much. This is a special one for me. This is one of my favorite books growing up. On February 18th, 1885, Mark Twain publishes The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Did you read this growing up?
Absolutely.
This is an American classic. It's a must. Ernest Hemingway described it as the beginning of modern American literature. And the discussions that it brought up to this day about race relations in the States, even the offensive language in the book that was used, the book got banned, the use of the N-word. And to this day, we're still discussing how these things affect our society. We still have all these issues of race in the States. And this story embodied in Huckleberry Finn with his runaway slave, Jim, is definitely something that generations of Americans read. And I think has become a worldwide phenomenon.
And I hope we'll continue to read.
Absolutely.
It's a very important book.
Got another one for you? Got time for me?
Yes, we do have time.
The teddy bear went on sale for the first time February 15th, 1903.
What?
Yes, the teddy bear. Do you know where the teddy bear came from?
You know what? I actually have no clue about teddy bear history. Where did it come from?
U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt was actually on some sort of hunting trip. Now, there's a lot of different...
Wait, we're talking about hunting and teddy bears. How does this...
He was actually hunting for real bears.
Oh, boy.
Apparently, everybody on the expedition had hunted successfully except him. So somebody actually caught a bear, clubbed it, tied it up for Teddy to come and just kill it. Teddy went up to this bear and said, hey, this is inhumane, I'm not gonna do this. And there was a lot of hype and a lot of stories that had, legends that had come from this event. And gradually, over the story becoming kind of big, all the little newspaper articles that wrote about it, all of a sudden the bear, instead of being mad and grisly, became soft and sweet.
Teddy's bear.
And so it became Teddy's bear that he spared.
Interesting.
And it
I don't
became a
know
worldwide
if children
phenomenon.
should necessarily know that they're cuddling up to, you know.
Yes, that story's a little
once
dark.
a violence situation.
It's a little bit much for kids.
But interesting.
Yes.
Enlightening. So we do have time for one more.
Oh, great. We have time for one more. So the planet Pluto was discovered in 1930 on February 18th.
Wow.
And since then, it actually has been taken away from the planet status. It's considered a dwarf planet now, because after all, it is more ice, very small. It's 1/6 the size of the moon. So people say, well, if you're going to include Pluto as a planet, well, then maybe you have to include many other things, different moons, different ice objects out there in our solar system. So poor Pluto, it got taken off the status, but it was discovered at this time this week.
Wow, that's so interesting. You know, this really was quite a big week in history. It's a pretty impressive week, one of the better ones.
A wild one, definitely a wild one, no doubt about that.
And I'm going to go watch The Breakfast Club after this.
Yeah,
I think it deserves it. You want to watch it together? Let's do that.
Sounds great.
Okay, well, Danny, thank you very much for being here with this segment. And coming up next, everything you wanted to know about the 2015 Oscar predictions. Stay with us. But first, let's hear some more of this morning's headlines. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us. We are joined again by the one and only Anthony Grant for the Viral Spy. Well, that is a web review. Thank you for being with us. And also commentating in this segment is Shachar Pellet, I-24 News' very own culture correspondent.
Good morning.
So let's hear it.
Okay.
What's the viral spiral?
Well, if I tell you that it's my party and I'm going to cry if I want to, what do you say?
Cry
you don't know. Okay. Cry if I want to.
Yeah,
you would cry too if it happened to you. Yeah, Leslie Gore, you know, iconic singer, songwriter, has passed away.
That's so sad.
Yes, she was, 1963, 64, I think her song was topping the charts, along with, it has to be said, You Don't Own Me, which is basically, yes, a very early feminist anthem. It became, it went from pop to sort of a feminist statement.
And the theme song of the First Wives Club.
Ah, okay.
They all sing it.
I remember
They
it
do.
from...
Right.
Is it from Sisters Act?
Sister Act?
Yeah, Sister Act. I can't remember. No, it's from with Bette Midler and
The First Wives Club.
The First Wives Club.
It's that one.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
there you go.
I just thought of that. Yes.
Incredible movie.
It's definitely
Incredible movie.
Yeah, you know,
and
her songs really touched deep
really
down.
resonated, yeah. So it's really all over, not just the entertainment press, but also front page of the New York Times, I believe. So a big cultural icon. We're very sad to see go. In the meantime, back to entertainment news. 50 Shades of Grey, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, because no one's talking about this at all.
Yes, so look, it's there we have it. It's torching records with a $94.4 million President's Day weekend, or I guess debut there stateside. It's a huge international hit. Yeah. It's just going gangbusters. I guess it's just
someone did something right there. I mean, they knew exactly when to put it out there and create the buzz.
The buzz. And the book created such a huge buzz too. And
yeah, but I think everyone was wondering how will this translate to movie, but I think to film. But I think the issue was, the book is so X-rated. I mean, it really is. It's pretty.
And the film is milder, I think. And I think people expected that. They knew it was going to be sort of a bummer, but they still went. They still wanted to see
go along with the really strict rating system in Hollywood. But I actually I saw a really funny headline in French. Aren't you impressed that I understood it?
I am indeed.
It said that. Like really sexy marketing for a prude film.
We have to say, they're selling like 50 Shades of Grey kits at Target, in the States. I don't know, but like next to the kids' toothbrushes. So, but,
what's in there?
I don't know, don't want to know. But it's like reminds me of the whole Bridges of Madison County phenomenon from years back when you had this amazingly popular book, and then you had the movie with Meryl Streep and Clint Eastwood, and it was just sort of a premonition of what's happening now. It's sort of an off-topic kind of book that just goes viral and it's just huge everywhere. It's sparking memes on Twitter. Jessica Simpson is now posing with 50 Shades of Grey-esque motifs. Yes, Jessica Simpson is back.
Hey, a revival too. Someone.
Yes, there she is with her hubby.
Keeps on giving.
Yeah. It's.
Why would you do that?
Because you're looking for attention, and you're Jessica Simpson. Yes, it's tasteful. It's provocative.
Is it?
I don't know. Well,
each in his own taste. I
speaking
guess.
of tasteful and provocative, no less personage or greater than Madonna has weighed in on 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon, saying she doesn't find it sexy.
Okay, well.
So
I'm
again,
just gonna end there.
Well,
no comment.
It's only the beginning.
Yeah.
Because what does Bruce Jenner think?
Oh,
okay.
I want to hear that.
I do not know, but I do know this. He has now come out and said that he felt he's a woman since he's the age 5.
Oh my goodness.
Now, he went through a lot of very alpha male behavior before coming to this disclosure, don't you think?
This is why this, I think, is so shocking to people. You know, being an Olympian and then an athlete and just such a macho guy, and also in the Kardashian show.
Children.
I mean, he was the ultimate patriarch.
Absolutely, and he still is. At least now he's the matriarch.
Yeah.
Well, he's the co-matriarch.
I don't think he could ever take over from Chris.
I wonder if he timed it with transparent. Like, is this something Amazon is paying him on the side? Because this timing is very interesting.
I've also thought of the timing about this with the car crash.
Right.
It all comes together.
No, but geez.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that family really does know how to work the industry and how to make really good
absolutely.
business
I mean,
deals.
look at Kim. She's now turned into a wolf.
Yeah.
Did you see Instagram?
I did.
Yes,
of course
we have
I
the
did.
picture. I mean, she now looks like that. I mean, she is.
What was the point of this? Was this at the Saturday Night Live?
I think it was before the SNL 40th anniversary show, and Kanye West was there too. He was also looking like a wolf. They were trying on some new contacts, color. I don't think they need them.
I just love how they think that like colored contacts means wolf. Like.
Well, you've seen those wolves with the, and they are kind of predatory, those two.
I call myself a wolf. That makes a lot of sense.
Anyway.
But, really weird. I think Kim looks way better with brown eyes.
I think so, too.
She looks pretty weird.
Yeah, leave the blue to the sea and to fashion.
I will not comment on that. Let's move on.
All right, well, I know you're going to want to comment on this. This little USA Today headline, which says that they were talking about Oscars. There's a wide gap between Oscars and pop culture. Talk about 50 Shades of Grey extensively. It's a very interesting debate that's emerging because, as of course, Oscar time is approaching. We'll see in a minute. Also, The Telegraph says the predictions are coming in for Best Picture. I think we have a visual there that shows all like these frames from the movies. There we go.
There we go.
So the debate has begun. The bets are starting.
So they're saying the voters are too old?
Well, with what USA Today was saying is that that the Oscar not the criteria, but that the contenders even are sort of there's a distance between what people are voting for and what people are really going for in the box office. So the commerce versus art, the age-old debate, which comes to a head this time of year when all eyes turn to Hollywood. So, with that in mind, I think we have more Oscar information
so I think this is actually a pretty good time to turn to you, Shahar, for the Oscar predictions of the year.
Less than a week away. I have to say, I'm very excited. We have our own I-24 News Oscar special coming soon this Sunday, but that's not the reason I'm excited. It's been a really good year for film. Really, I think there were amazing features, but I'd like to start with the bad news. Speaking of controversies, I think that especially the greatest criticism this year was Oscar missing out an opportunity to make history with who could have been the first ever black African-American woman nominated for Best Director, Ava DuVernay for Selma, a film about the story and life of Martin Luther King, and she was one of the top nominees and still didn't make it to the last final 5, and in fact diversity on its own is lacking very much this year. This is the first time an all-white group of acting nominees is in since 1998. Not even one black, Asian, Hispanic nominee. And this made people actually furious because it takes Hollywood back instead of forward.
Yeah, that's actually pretty shocking.
Yes, it was.
Of course, the cynics will say they did black last year.
Yes, but that's ridiculous.
And
especially in a year with Selma in it, we were expecting to see more nominees of color, and there's also a great underrepresentation of women. If we take a look at the 8 nominees for Best Picture, all protagonists are male, from Stephen Hawking to Michael Keaton in Birdman, American Sniper, even The Grand Budapest Hotel. They're all male protagonists. No women in the Best Picture category, and that's really too bad. But now to the fun stuff.
Okay.
My personal favorites and predictions of the year. I'd like to start with my personal favorite, which actually has the most nominees together with Birdman, 9 nominees. And that's The Grand Budapest Hotel. does not stand a chance for Best Picture, but this marvelous universe that Wes Anderson creates every time amazes me over and over again. This very colorful and detailed universe. I've actually seen behind the scenes making of this film. They create from stamps to passports to names of cities and countries that are literally alive in this film. They create it all from scratch. They make up these beautiful things all to the very last detail. So much creativity in one film. And another favorite of mine who does not stand a chance is Whiplash, the story of a young drummer.
Yeah, what is this about?
So it's an aspiring drummer, young drummer, and his mentor, a conductor of one of the finest orchestras in Manhattan. And it's the relationship, very tense relationship between them, but it's also a film about how far would you go to fulfill your dream. And it has so much context in its only 1 hour and 40 minutes, and it's really great cinematography,
film.
very tense film. I think both editing and cinematography stand a good chance here, but unfortunately and of course J.K. Simmons will with no doubt take the supporting actor this year, but I was disappointed to learn that Damien Chazelle, the very young and talented director, isn't even nominated together with Clint Eastwood, who isn't nominated for American Sniper.
Director snubs here,
yes,
it
yes.
sounds like.
There were a lot of snubs this year.
Yeah.
Jennifer Aniston not nominated for Cake, and Clint Eastwood was a very big snub. But that's the way you have it. That's what it is. A word before I move on to Boyhood, which I think will take it. A word on Birdman. I thought Birdman was fantastic. Now, you can jump in and say anything against it if you have, but you haven't seen it. Well, guys, I have to admit, I'm a very mainstream person, and I knew I was going to hate it. I went on to see Birdman knowing this was a very surreal, bizarre film.
Yeah, I mean, just the shot alone is like...
Exactly. The opening of the trailer is, you can understand, and I loved it. It's a really, really, I would say even genius masterpiece, the way it combines the behind the scenes of a theater and the struggles of a Hollywood comeback star. This is really, really an interesting... There's so many plot lines, and I did hear criticism over the fact that there's too many stories, that he's not really looking deeply into each and every path, but I still really, really appreciated this
I'd like to see this
film, even visually.
It's also nice to see Michael Keaton back.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it really is.
For quite a long time.
Well, speaking of predictions, I think Hollywood will appreciate his comeback. And although Eddie Redmayne portraying Stephen Hawking did win the BAFTAs and everything else,
Shaffa, I wanted to
Michael
ask
Keaton,
you,
I think, stands a good chance.
How much of a predictor are the BAFTA awards when it comes to
they
award
are
season?
Very, very good predictors. And speaking of Boyhood, which took everything throughout the way, although Birdman is a favorite among, it took actually the more American audiences, the SAGs, the Producers Awards, the Critics Awards, but the BAFTAs are usually very good forecast, and this time Boyhood, I think the appreciation of this 12-year production following the same actors, the same family, over and over again, 1 week, 1 month a year. And you know, last year we had 12 Years a Slave. They love the number 12, and this time a 12-year production. I think this one is definitely the winner of this year.
Did Cumberbatch win at BAFTAs for something?
So no, I think talking about snubs, that The Imitation Game will be the biggest loser. It's nominated for 8 Oscars, and I'm predicting 0. Because as much as I love Mr. Cumberbatch, I don't really think his film stands a chance in any of the categories they're nominated in. Such good movies, as I said, a very, very good year for film. And one more thing, the official ceremony is called the Academy Awards of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. And this was a year of sciences. Speaking of Benedict and Eddie Redmayne, both we had both Alan Turing, a portrayal of Alan Turing in The Imitation Game, the man who is considered the father of the computer and managed to break the enigma, of course, and some say bring an end to World War II. And on the other side, we have Stephen Hawking with us until this very day, a miracle phenomena in his own behalf, overcoming both social and physical obstacles. And one more science film which isn't really about science, but a professor of linguistics, that's Julianne Moore in Still Alice, who suffers. It's all about a lot of suffering. Julianne Moore suffers from Alzheimer in this portrayal in Still Alice, and once again, if we go back to predictions, she will definitely be Best Actress of the Year.
So?
She took the BAFTA, the Golden Globes, everything is already in her pocket, and I think she can leave room for another statue, and this would be her first, so we're crossing our fingers. Her first Oscar. She's already been nominated three times, and
that's shocking to me that she hasn't received
she's
that
just
honor yet.
an Academy Award made actress, isn't she? Yeah. She's been nominated for The Hours, and she's a brilliant actress. I don't think anyone is debating that, and this is her year. Of course, this is a year that Meryl Streep is also nominated. They just have to nominate her. She's nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Into the Woods, and she's not going to take it. I do think Patricia Arquette from Boyhood. Boyhood, I think, will take Best Picture, Best Director for Richard Linklater, and Best Supporting Actress for Patricia Arquette, who did once again a great job there. But she's going to face Meryl Streep, as everyone does every year.
And
Meryl's just, unreal.
Unbroken.
Yes.
Is also not...
So Unbroken, no, that was, I don't think it's even considered a snub, because I'm not sure people really thought it would reach that high. It's a good story, and the fact that Angelina Jolie is behind it was an interesting, let's say, behind. Yes, exactly, behind the scenes element. But no, the film itself isn't really Oscar material, and did not carry the weight. But it's going to be a very interesting ceremony.
Year of the man, certainly.
Yes,
I think we can just say that.
I'm sad to say that.
Well, Shaffa, thank you very much for all these predictions, and be sure to catch our special on Sunday of the Oscars. And that's all for now. Thank you for watching.